Hey.
Hi everyone. It's Rohini Walker here from Luna Arcana, and I'm here today with Kim Stringfellow, who is very well known here in the Mojave Desert for her vast body of work, primarily Mojave Project, which we'll be talking about today. And I'm just going to give a quick introduction to Kim for those of you who are listening who don't know her and her work. Kim Stringfellow is an artist, educator, writer, and independent curator based here in Joshua Tree, California. Her work bridges cultural geography, public practice, and experimental documentary into creative, socially engaged transmedia experiences. She's a 2016 Andy Warhol for the Visual Arts Curatorial Fellow and a 2015 Guggenheim Fellow in photography. Kim was awarded an honorary doctorate from Claremont Graduate University in 2018, and she's now Professor I can never pronounce this word properly, Emeritus at San
Meredith.
Diego, San Diego State University's School of Art and Design. I think I've just never had to say it out loud. I've just always said it in my head, Mauritius. Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really amazing bio there, Kim. And your work is ongoing with the Mojave Project. And yeah, I'd just like to start off by talking a little bit about Mojave Project and how that came to be.
Well, I started that project in late 2014, but I had this idea of focusing on the desert as a research subject probably about since 2005. But I wasn't actually living in the Mojave Desert. And originally I was actually really thinking about the state of Nevada because it's a really interesting state. It's very unique, in the United States. Nearly all of it is public land. Of
Mm.
course, there's gambling. There's a lot of things you can do there that for a long time you could only do there, like gambling. Of course, we have a lot of Indian gaming now throughout the country, Native American gaming. So yeah, so I was really like interested in this idea of documenting a place, documenting its culture, uniqueness, history, also policy, contemporary issues that affect the place, especially the environment. Like most of my work is centered around ecological or environmental issues. So that's always a part of it. But because people are a part of the environment, a big part of this is also how we interact and how we change the environment for good or worse. Oftentimes it's worse. Um,
Yeah.
but there's also examples of people doing really interesting things and very courageous activities, that are positive for the place. But I realized like Nevada was going to be too hard to afford to work if I was down in San Diego where I taught,
Mm.
was living. So when I finally moved up here in 2010, I had been commuting for teaching a couple days a week down to San Diego. I was working on actually I was working on a project about Owens Valley. There it is, taking an audio tour, and I started to think about my next project around 2013. And I decided, well, I think I can start working on something about the Mojave Desert and,
Yeah.
focus it in on this arid landscape and really give myself an excuse to explore. I mean, that's kind of what, I've kind of designed my projects because I'm interested in going to places I haven't been, learning about, communities, doing deep dives into histories and things like that. So it was really kind of planned so I can do what I like to do, but also share it with other
Mm.
people. And so the website was actually designed, it's mojaveproject.org, to build over time. So the content, I decided, it was different from previous projects where I would, did a book on the Salton Sea, so, you have to write and edit, the manuscript, and you give it to a publisher, and then you have this complete thing that's done. But I wanted to start to reveal the content as I was doing it, for a number of reasons. It's basically a blog, but it's a very deep blog.
Yeah.
Just like 500-word postings, they're sometimes up to 8,000 words,
Yeah.
and they take me months to work on occasionally, depending on what the topic is. So that's what I started. And because I've been working as, doing nonprofit work, and I wanted this to be free to the public, I have to get funding. So the very beginning, I kind of built, I talked about the king clone, the creosote that's off at 247. And I did a couple of dispatches, built the website to give an idea of what I was doing. And so I was able to apply for a California Humanities, California Documentary, research and development, that led to full production funding, and that led to the Guggenheim Fellowship in photography that was based on the portfolio that I was starting to build on the Mojave Desert. So it was very specific in terms of what my intent was,
Yeah.
driving it to move this thing forward. And so, yeah, and the nice thing about releasing something in the public realm like this is then people start to contact you, or they're like, oh, I know this really interesting community, Darwin, that's, has all these artists and it's very quirky, so then I start to learn about it, because there's so many things I didn't know before I started working on this. And that was a good production method to do this type of project. So
Yeah, ongoing. And they're called and the reason I know Kim and Luna Arcana knows Kim is because we have published one of Mojave Project's dispatches per issue since the very beginning. Kim's been kind enough to let us publish a dispatch. And as you mentioned, because they're not just 500-word blog posts, they've had to be edited down. And the King Clone Creosote one is actually in our most recent issue, issue 6. And so with that, so for instance, with the King Clone Creosote issue, King Clone Creosote dispatch, it sounds like that was one of the first ones.
yeah.
So
you can see the dates of them.
Yeah. And so how did you, because I'm assuming, so this is based on the assumption that you were coming in kind of new to the Mojave Desert and its flora and fauna and the kind of the real kind of intricacies surrounding like the creosote, for instance, because most people when they come here for the first time, they're like, what is this? It just looks like a shrub to them. So how did you know about the creosote and the king clone and how ancient it is?
Well, I have been coming out here for quite some time, since even the mid-90s. So I just didn't actually, I started living here full time. Well, not full time, but yeah, full time in 2010. And then I actually bought a home in 2011. So I already knew a lot about it. I had done Jackrabbit Homestead, and that's—
Oh yeah, you'd already done that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was out in Wonder Valley. So, there was quite a bit of research, but I think with the King Clone, I think that was maybe even something that Chris Clark, Chris he's written so much about the desert previously, with KCET and, other publications. And so, he's such a wealth of knowledge, and it probably was something that he wrote, and then I started to look into it. But when I worked on that, I wanted to talk with the gentleman, the professor, the biologist who actually him and another gentleman discovered it. And so I was able to do that. And he was up at UC Davis. He was long retired. And it was really great to do that audio snippet. And the nice thing about the website is there's audio, there's multimedia. That's the reason it's transmedia. So I oftentimes do an audio interview that is, in that person's voice that accompanies a dispatch. So so that Dr. Frank Vasic, he's the biologist that talked about that. But I should say, like, when I talk to like a scientist or, I'm not so interested in, I'm interested in the science, of course, but I'm interested in their personal relationship. I want a very human, not something that's going to be, rattling off the science and those things. Like I discussed that in the dispatch, but why they're so interested in something. And so I think that was a good track for that because, he has a very personal relationship with this plant and probably others that, he's, and also helped to get protective status of that particular preserve there. So
because I love that dispatch, and all the ones that we've published have always been like, oh, which one should I pick? There's so many. And I really encourage if you're watching to just go and check out, because you'll just be on there for a long time, just rabbit holing into so many really hidden things about the desert, and not just this desert, but like areas in the desert west. And tell us a little bit about the Jackrabbit Homestead Project, because I know that's something that's really kind of become something that you've become known for.
Yeah, that project, I published the book in 2008, so I've been working on that since 2005 out here before I was living out here. And that is a document of the Small Tract Act of 1938, where people were able to go out and lease 5 acres of mostly desert land, although it was all over. Parcels were available across the United States, but the center of the activity was in and around 29 Palms and throughout the Mojave Desert and Colorado Desert. So when I would come out here, to recreate, I started to see these little cabins, and I was really curious about the history. And then, I learned about what they were, and I realized like no one had really done a pretty, extensive history of the cabins themselves. And so I had just, published Greetings from the Salton Sea, and I wanted to do another desert project. So it made perfect sense to work on this. And so it's kind of a deadpan, the way they're photographed. I'm really was thinking of Ed Richet's, his gas station, like his different little photo book projects that he's done. And so I did these where I'm just kind of documenting, not trying to make them picturesque or romantic, just very stark at the height of the day. And then I also was able to map them on the land so I could figure out who actually built it, because by that time the databases of the Bureau of Land Management with all of the different patents, which is basically a deed for homesteads, they were all available online. And so it was kind of a complicated process of mapping them with GPS and then getting a plat map from the county. And the plat maps all have the 5 acre parcels listed, because that was the settlement pattern of this area. Most of, subdivided neighborhood, everything's on 5 acres or 2.5 acres. Like I'm on 2.5 acres, even though there wasn't a Jackrabbit homestead. So that was pretty easy to compare the two. And then I could look up and find the patent. And actually behind me on the wall, the cover of the book is below the trailer image. That's the Worth brewer homestead out in Wonder Valley. And next to it is a print of the patent that's associated
Oh,
with.
wow. Yeah.
And so, it was a kind of mapping project. And then, I talked about how when I was doing the project, so I'm doing this thing where I'm mapping these things and then talking about the history. But then I started to meet all these creative people that were living out here, and they were also interested in the cabins, or they lived in cabins, or they were fixing them up. It was even before Airbnb, so people were they were renting them out privately, through just probably a website that they had built. And and so I realized, like, oh, I need to bring this into this project, because I don't like to have things stuck in the past. I want to show how things are evolving. And so that was perfect. And then, there were people like Chris Carhar, who's an artist that's out in Wonder Valley. She became a collaborator on the project. And they were doing the Wonder Valley Homestead Festival out there. And so there was a lot of activity in 2009 about the cabins. And, that was really why I wanted to move out here, is because I met like such a great community of people out here, through that particular project. So,
Yeah.
but it's like, it's evolved, the project, like I did the book, and then I did an audio tour. The audio tour was funded by California Humanities. And that's like a little self-guided tour that you drive out on Highway 62 in Wonder Valley. And then you just kind of listen to people talking about different aspects of what the cabins mean to them personally, and the history. And then the Autry showed it as part of an award that I received from the Autry Museum in Los Angeles. And that really helped to bolster the project publicly. A lot of people saw that, and it raised, awareness. Like, it wasn't just like people knew about them out here, but then it got it more into the public and more, interest. And so, I did that. And then in 2021, I was asked to do site-specific installation for Desert X.
Yeah.
And I'm a research-based artist. I don't really make things anymore. I make photographs, and I do installations. And I hadn't, made a physical art object in a long time. So that was kind of cool to be able to do that. And I ended up, because they have substantial, like, good funding to do a project. And so I proposed that I make a kind of miniature, but, where you can actually go inside it. It's the size of a shed, a jackrabbit homestead, and outfitted it to be historically accurate to the period of the early 1950s. And it was based on a woman who wrote about jackrabbit homesteading, about her particular experience in the early 1950s for Desert Magazine. And so if you go to jackrabbithomestead.com, you can read the essay that talks about that. And I worked with two musicians. One was the voice, and she did readings of an edited version of the writings, and then we put it to music. Jim White did the music, and we did some sound effects. And so when you go to see the cabin, you peek in the windows. I mean, this was during COVID, where we needed to have space, and so it was outdoors. And so I thought it would be a nice project, because people could go see art during this period, where everyone was feeling cabin fever, and, it was depressing for many of us. And, you could go and look inside and see this tableau, and then listen to the story through the words of someone who actually partook in jackrabbit homesteading. So
Yeah, because I went to see that for Desert X and wrote a short piece about it for
yeah,
KCT. And it was really, yeah, it was just quite it's just the reproduction of it inside, the peeking inside it was just like, oh yeah, you do feel kind of, well, I just really wanted to go inside and be
yeah.
inside it. I couldn't.
Yeah, sometimes I would have it actually open, you know, when we were showing it actually for Desert X. And you know, I really enjoyed working on it during that period because I
Yeah.
was outdoors and we built it, and then I was able to like go shopping and you know, it was fun. It was a really fun project. I'd like to do something again. I mean, it was a difficult project, you
Yeah, I
know,
bet. Yeah.
getting everything together, you know, because it's actually, you know, it could be permitted, you know, even though it's built that well. And that was one thing with Desert X. You know, I said, I don't want to like take this apart afterwards. So
Mhm.
I'm going to build it so we can fit it on a flatbed truck. And will you pay for it to move it back up? So now it's been two places. It's at the Joshua Tree Retreat Center right off Highway 62. It's in
Mm.
the sculpture garden that Rolo Castillo has put together. And you can go during you know, daytime when it's open, and you can still see it and listen to it. So, and you can also
Yeah.
see it online if you want to see just photographs of the project interior online. So
Yeah, I love that it's still there for people to go and see. And I guess not that many people, I mean, desert people who live here in this community will know that they can go and see it at the retreat center. But for folks coming into town who, yeah, it's definitely worth going and having a peek and having a look and experiencing it, and the other sculptures there at the retreat center sculpture garden. And I love that it's kind of just, it's there now. It's an
yeah, and
actual,
there's a great vegetarian vegan restaurant there. Um,
yeah.
there's lots that has a whole history, you know, the architecture and everything.
Yeah, that's like,
Really
yeah,
place.
it's got its own, yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. architecture. Yeah, it's its own art installation, just that whole compound.
Yeah.
Um, and so with Mojave Project now, because it is this, I mean, it's really this vast library now that it's turned into with all the different dispatches. And so how do you see it? How do you see it going forward? You just see it kind of like almost like a legacy, really.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is that. I mean, I knew it was going to be a long-term project, so it's been going for 8 years. You know, there's times where I've, you know, um, last year I kind of stepped away from it for a little bit because I wanted to do other things. Desert X, same thing. That was my focus that year. But I mean, there's still so many things I can write about. But at some point, it's going to kind of wind down
Mhm.
because I do have other things that I would like to work on. And, you know, they're not in the desert necessarily. So, you know, I hope to wind it down, but I've done, you know, along with the website, um, it now have printed versions that are available in some of the local shops in town throughout the Morongo Basin. It's really so people like sometimes you really want something printed, which I
Mhm.
prefer. I
Yeah, me
like
too.
real
Yeah.
books. So I printed so far I have 4 volumes of dispatches, and there's over 45, I believe now. Um,
Yeah.
but they're getting a lot more complex. So they take longer because I'm
Yeah.
doing a lot of science-based work right now. But so there's that aspect, and then it's shown 3 times. It at MOA was the initial kind of launch. I think that was in 2016. And then it was at LACE in Los Angeles. And
Oh
with
yeah.
the LACE show, the Andy Warhol Foundation funded me. I curated this weekend tour that was really great, where we went into the Mojave Desert. We had this immersive experience. So there was about 35 people, you know, on the bus. We had a charter bus. We had a great charter bus driver, and she was really into what we were doing, and she had never been out to the Mojave Desert, so that turned out really well. And we went to a bunch of different places in North Mojave. We went to Darwin, we went into Death Valley, we were in Beatty, Nevada. We went to Rhyolite, which is an abandoned ghost town that's on the border of California, Nevada, you know, close to the entrance of Death Valley. And I've done a couple different things like that, including one that was coordinated for the show that I did in 2022 at the Barrick Museum at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So that was a really big culmination of the project. It's not the complete project because it's still ongoing, but it was a very large exhibition that I think turned out really well. And we did another, I coordinated another tour that was in the Amargosa Desert, and it was centered around Shoshone area and Ash Meadows, and into Death Valley. Like, a geologist met with us to talk about a kind of very complex geological formation called the Amargosa Chaos, which is
I've heard a bit about it. Yeah,
in itself, they don't quite understand how things that are thousands upon thousands of years old, you know, rock is in different layers. It means like it got so jumbled up somehow throughout time over, you know, what, billions of years. They still can't really figure it out. And we visited the pupfish at Devil's Hole, met with, you know, park rangers. We went into the facility where they're breeding a backup population of the pupfish in a simulated multi-million-dollar facility to do so. And then we had a cultural event, which was really great, where at the Amargosa Opera House, which Marta Beckett, the ballerina, started in the late 60s. And she's also a painter. She painted her audience in the opera house. We screened a film, a 1924 von Stroheim film called Greed, which was originally 8 hours. And Greed is about greed. And it uses the backdrop of the gold rush, the late gold rush in the early 20th century. And it ends up in Death Valley. This was, I think, maybe even before it was even a national monument. It could have been just a couple years before that. No, it was, because it was made a national monument in the 1930s. And it was filmed, so basically it was filmed across the mountain range from the opera house in the desert there. So that's where the final scenes are. And so we watched the silent film. It was an edited version, and I had commissioned a collective from Minneapolis, and it's a quartet. And they did an original score for it, and then they came out and played it live.
Wow.
And
that must have been amazing.
We didn't record it. You had to be there to experience it. And, you know, it was great. There was about 80 people at that one. So
wow. Yeah, that must have been something in that venue as well.
Yeah.
That must have been really special. And you have a dispatch on the opera house as well, don't you?
Yeah, that was done at least a year or two before. And I actually was able to interview Marta before she passed. You know, she was in the 90s. And there's a short film on Mojave Project about Death Valley Junction, and you just hear her voice. She didn't want to have she didn't want to be videotaped at the time. But she accepted to do an audio interview, which was kind of difficult at that time. She didn't like everyone. She didn't want to work with everyone. So
She's a proper desert recluse.
yeah, we discussed, I think we're both Leos, and we discussed cats. And so, you know,
So it was a meeting. There was a common ground.
yeah. So I spent at least an hour and a half or more with her,
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I'll have to find that one on Mojave Project. And I guess this is kind of like a leading segue from me on the topic of greed and
Mhm.
what it and sort of your reflections, I guess, on what is going on in the desert here.
Mm.
Just in terms of the development
Mm.
and the just it's getting more crowded, all of these things. It's just, for someone who's lived here for a long time and whose work has been very much a kind of expression of love for this land, like what your thoughts are, because our most recent issue is kind of like the kind of loose theme is just this kind of grief of the loss of ecological, just the loss of wilderness and ecological grief. It's a very loose theme kind of woven through it. So just your thoughts on not just our desert here, but the desert west, really.
Well, I mean, I think too, part of the reason that I wanted to do this project was to really like give a different view of the desert. I noticed like there's actually a site that's been ongoing that talks about all different aspects. It gives you, animals, landscape. I forget the name of it, but it's a good site. It's very practical.
Mm-hmm.
But there seemed to be a lot of just stereotypes that were depicted in the media, perpetuating those stereotypes, those types of individuals, the bearded prospector,
Mm-hmm.
and there's so many different types of people that live in the desert region, including in cities like, Victorville, Lancaster, Palmdale, Las Vegas, is in the
Yeah.
Mojave Desert, so it's a the contemporary Mojave Desert is very, very different. And yes, people can't afford to live on the coast. A lot of people, they've been priced out, and that's the reason that the Morongo Basin, artists like myself, like you, creative people, we found we could thrive out here. And some of us, when we got in here, I bought a house in 2011. It was very affordable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And artists are the first level of gentrification. I've participated in that in San Francisco and, Chicago, different places I've lived. I'm very aware of that. So we do contribute to that. And I'm sure, maybe people looking at some of the things I've done, have drawn people, and hopefully the people that we want to be out here. Um,
Yeah.
but it has been fascinating to see how much, especially with the real estate and the Airbnb things. And rather than go into that, I think the KCET, sorry, not KCET, it's the PBS
Oh,
station,
yes.
which used to be KCET. They did a really good segment on
Mm-hmm.
all this kind of development affecting the Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, Yucca Valley area. But what I've been really, in terms of thinking of that and development, I've been working on a whole series on renewable energy. And I started
Yeah.
lithium, which is, it's the new gold rush. It's the
Mm-hmm.
white gold rush. And so lithium, of course, is used for rechargeable electric batteries for EVs. We're trying to move, from fossil fuels into electrification, and there's a whole complexity to that. But I think the main thing for me, and I knew this for several, years, even when I started the project, that this would be the center because we have sun,
Yeah.
and also because of extraction. So when you look at, the Mojave Project, I talk about the cultural, the physical, and the geological landscape.
Hmm.
And that is a through line through that.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about, say, the history of borax, mining, and the 29, the mule team, and all those things, that all fits in and leads us to where we are now with renewable energy, and lithium. And, the center of the epicenter of activity for lithium prospecting is in Nevada. Nevada is where, most of it is public land, like I said earlier, and it's very mining extraction friendly. Big gold mines, whole history of silver with the Comstock. And what's curious about lithium is it was kind of not, it was not important.
No.
Not
Yeah.
until, the 90s, when people started to use it for rechargeable batteries for like your drill or something like that, handheld drill. And then, of course, we moved into cars. And, it's going to be extracted in many places, and some places where it shouldn't be. And that is something that I've been focusing on, is the collision of this, renewable energy infrastructure and how it's affecting public land in the desert.
Mm.
Because so much, besides the military, a lot of the Mojave Desert is public land that's managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And, on top of the lithium, then you have solar, you have industrial
Yeah.
solar. And I just installed another series of solar panels on my house to bring it up so I don't have to pay electrical bill. And that's where it belongs, I feel. But
Yeah, rooftop. Yeah.
we do need some of these big facilities or solar fields. But the way that capitalism drives, how these things get built, where they're ending up, is something that I'm very critical of, because there's so many places for us to put solar, and
Yeah.
large scale warehouses, or roofs. You can cover canals. You can use it
Mhm.
with agriculture and use it as a shade structure for growing things underneath.
Mm.
Many creative ways to do this that are far closer to the places where they're being used.
Yeah.
But public land is cheap, and people like to have total control. So now we're starting to see these huge, covering huge amounts of acreage. Like there is a new one that's, going into construction now near the town of Boron,
Yeah.
where the big borax mine is. And
Mm.
that has everyone very, very upset, because they're going to destroy 4,000 Joshua trees in the
I
process.
know. Yeah.
And I believe that is a private holding. So it's
Oh,
not, maybe it's not subject to the same laws that are, don't, I still have to look into this myself. But what they do in these cases with, say, they're going to take,
mhm.
a certain amount of protected species like desert tortoise, which get to place from the industrial solar as well. Oftentimes they have to put money into protecting another area. So that's one thing that doesn't get talked about much with Argentina, is they're actually doing that. But for me, it's not, I think there's a better solution,
Oh, yeah.
to not just let the industry determine where these things are going.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the big problem. And once you erase desert flora and fauna, it's impossible to bring it back. Those Joshua trees where they've burned in these
Oh
fires,
yeah.
climate change, they're not going to be coming back. And that is one of my main concerns. And having people understand what they are part of too, what we're part of, with our consumption,
Yeah.
and travel and all these things that go into like this need for more and more energy. Bitcoin, mining, there's so many different things.
Yeah.
And even the materials, like there's a critical mineral earth mine in Mountain Center. And so these are rare earths that are also used in a lot of
Oh,
technical,
yeah.
and those are actually mined right off I-15 above the giant Ivanpah solar facility, which has the 3 towers, the death
Yeah.
towers that some people call. Technically some of the material mined there could have gone into those solar panels or into
Yes. Yeah.
the wind turbines. So it's very interesting to me that the desert gives so much and we're taking so much away from it
Yeah.
at the same
And because the
time.
desert is such a very specific, it's resilient and also it's very fragile.
Yeah.
So it's and it relies on a very specific balance for its ecosystem to thrive and survive. Yeah, it is this what you mentioned about the consumption issue. It's that's the thing. It's like nobody's really, well, obviously in communities and people doing activism work, that's being talked about, but within industry, obviously, nobody's addressing the consumption issue, because obviously industry just wants to feed the beast of consumption. And so it's it's just this insatiable thing. And so we're just this yawning chasm of like just keep doing more of the thing to feed the endless consumption. And from your perspective, with your work and your reach and your influence, like how do you feel in terms of like speaking to this consumption issue and like what can even be done about it? Because that's an individual choice point.
Well, I mean, it's corporations, industry, like to, make us think that, but it's really, they're the polluters,
Yeah.
the of the world. And I mean, there's things that you can do as an individual. I mean, definitely like flying constantly is not a good thing if you're concerned about climate change and climate catastrophe. I do still fly, but very, very rarely.
Just not like, oh yeah, I'll just go here and fly there. Like think about it and consider it and weigh up different options. And
or is there a different way you can travel, or just doing a special trip and going somewhere for a month? Long haul is better than short haul on the plane. But I don't want to like preach right now, but
no, and you don't want to tell people, nobody wants to sort of police people and tell people what to do, but it is that kind of and you're so right, it is industry that kind of feeds that machine, obviously, literally. And with the topic of the lithium mining, and especially for EVs now, because I'm considering potentially getting one, and obviously because then there's a part of me that's like, but the lithium mining, and obviously but there's like gasoline. And
no, I definitely feel like I'm on my second hybrid, and I do want to get a full EV. That's part of the reason I updated my solar when I can afford, and I'm kind of waiting for the technology, solid state batteries, possibly things like that. But there's different places where the lithium can be mined, and right now these things are just starting to get set up in the United States, because there's only one place where lithium is mined domestically, and that's Silver Peak, Nevada. And it's a brine evaporation, which is the typical thing, like when you're looking at South America, where most of the lithium worldwide comes from. It's the they're kind of very beautiful to see them from space. To
Yeah, yeah, I've seen those pictures. Yeah,
pools, and they're like this chartreuse, water.
yeah.
But it takes a lot of land. It's taking tons of water,
Hmm.
because they have to bring that up. It's very environmentally destructive. And it's not a very efficient process. You only can get about 60% of the lithium through evaporation, but it lets the sun do that. You're not
Yeah,
using
yeah.
and then there's different types of mining, hard rock mining, and that's the other big source of lithium. But that's the hard rock mining is done primarily in Australia.
Yeah.
Um, and
Okay.
it's a very carbon intensive process. And so now they're looking for new forms, and there's claystone, which is lithium that's in, different hosted, you know, um, rocks, usually different types of clays that have boron and different things like that. And they're trying to do some processes. So there's a very controversial project on Rhyolite Ridge
Oh,
that
yeah.
I talked about. I have the latest dispatch is about lithium, and really focused in Nevada. And there's a little endangered plant. It's listed as endangered now. It's Team's buckwheat.
Mm.
It's a crazy little plant. It has little yellow pom-poms. It's really pretty when it blooms, but it lives on one of the most inhospitable, on this white. You can tell when you see it, that's lithium. It's this,
Right. Yeah.
and it's growing on there. And that's the only place it's at. It's over 10 acres, and they want to mine it. And there's,
Mm.
they're they're being forced into having to protect it. But those of us who know, or if you've been to an open pit gold mine and see how they do stuff, and see how, they always have some kind of environmental protocol to,
Yeah.
like, the plants that, it's really a sorry situation to see. I've never seen remediation.
Yeah.
Mining is not sustainable. There's no way to do sustainable mining.
Mining. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so, there's things like that are happening. And I'm working also on a piece on Ash Meadows, where there's a similar issue with the National Wildlife Refuge and the Devil's Hole pupfish, and now the community. And that's not a good place for a lithium mine.
Mm.
But there's also new technology they're doing at the Salton Sea called direct lithium extraction. And so there are ways, and this is the thing, as a consumer, when you buy your electric car, there's different manufacturers, and they are going to source it from a particular place.
Yeah.
And if you don't like what's happening at Thacker Pass, what has happened with the Paiute, and people
Hmm.
are very upset with that particular claystone lithium mine. Don't
Hmm.
buy a car where they manufactured the battery from there. You have to
Yeah.
do, some kind of homework to do
Yeah.
that.
Do our due diligence to see, yeah, the source
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think that's what's different about this particular technology. And because it is about, the people that are like us, we don't want to do something, we don't want to purchase something that's going to cause more problems. And
Yeah.
so that is the thing that we can hold these companies, these corporations, which are multinational. Most of them
Mhm.
are, they just have a subsidiary that's based in the US. They're usually Australian or Canadian.
Mhm.
And, we can force them to do better practices that may cost them more money. And they're
Yeah.
being
And take a
scrutinized.
bit longer.
Yeah, they're being scrutinized, and people don't want to buy a dirty, EV battery. And so
Yeah.
that's the advantage that the consumer has if you are aware you have, and that's part of the reason I'm writing about it, because
Yeah.
it's directly going to completely transform the desert West. Between the mining, because it's not just
Mhm.
lithium, there's critical minerals, there's copper, there's, for electrification, there's so
Mhm.
many things. You have solar panels, you have wind, you have all the things that go
Yeah.
into making those things. So there's so much, and there's areas that are going to be completely sacrificed and completely industrialized that are undeveloped, wilderness.
Mhm.
And, I don't think that's right to,
No,
um,
no.
when there's alternatives, like I said earlier about solar. So
Yeah,
I think that's what I'm trying to do right now. The ball is, it's a snowball. It's starting to go down the hill and pick up more and more, and it's just going to crush a bunch of things. But we're in this period, really, I think within the next 10 years, that we have to keep these activities in check as
yeah,
much as possible. The public needs to be outraged when they hear about 4,000 Joshua trees are going to
yeah,
be, chipped. Oh, they're even doing it, I guess, where they put up some, to block the view so people can't see the trees because they're basically going into chippers.
wow,
Because they
yeah,
don't want people to actually see what they're doing. Because it is very disturbing.
it is, yeah,
And I think that's the thing, is like that awareness. But those are the things, like this stuff is accelerating.
mhm.
And we environmentalists like myself, activists, we need to make the public aware. And so that's kind of where my project has really shifted right now.
Yeah,
Still doing things, cultural things. I'll return, I'm going to do a big piece on off-roading culture, the good and the bad, different things like that. But it's really been focused on the environment right now because
yeah,
it's so crucial right now.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that's the kind of the bigger picture of what's happening to this region, this desert. Yeah, and the kind of it's I think it's this perception, well, when industry and corporations and sort of that lens is turned towards the desert, and they just see, oh, there's just nothing here,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
empty scrubland, dead, arid, nothing desert, and nobody's really looking at the life that's here. It's just
yeah.
not. And so it is that perception of, why is everyone, we're just mining lithium so people can use electric cars, and it's just changing that. Like, this desert
Yeah.
is full of, it's not a forest with trees above ground, but everything's happening under the ground.
Well, look at it this way. So a lot of the multinational mining companies work out of Vancouver.
Mm,
Vancouver is I'm from Pacific Northwest, very verdant, green
yeah, yeah,
tree. And so if someone is accustomed to that particular place in that landscape, they come
mm,
here and they don't have much knowledge about flora and fauna and the complexity and the biodiversity. They think that,
yeah,
that's what I'm trying to do with Mojave Project, talking
yeah,
about king flung creosote,
yeah,
like this, cloning behavior, and this particular organism has the same DNA that it had 10,000 years ago,
yeah, it's amazing. Yeah,
there's so many things we don't know. And so that is something I think that we have to make that connection. And that it does work, like it's kind of working where right now there's a lithium mine that is really ill-suited for the particular place. And I'm kind of amazed because there's so much money that goes into these things that these guys, with their consultants and everything, they're not, figuring this out before they even start this. I mean, they should have figured this out when you have a national wildlife refuge, next to it, you have a national
yeah,
park, you know, um, for Devil's Hole pupfish, it's just crazy to me. But
yeah,
the one thing I wanted to say too, that I'm going to actually put in my solar piece, I really want people that discuss, journalists that discuss energy. I want them to stop using this particular, utility scale solar field covering 4,000, 5,000 acres, whatever it is going to generate this amount of electricity for this many homes. Well, these homes can generate their own
yeah,
electricity. It's like, why say that? Why not just put
yeah,
it? And the only way that happens is if we deregulate, if we do
mm,
not have investor-owned utilities. we need to have this energy commons. We need, and we can do
Yes,
that on
yes,
small scale. California is not making it easy, but Joshua Tree should have its own, we should have our own like electrical, energy board, like our water board,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I think people, if we found places that are disturbed in our area and we
Mhm.
built, a big solar field to cover people who can't put it or can't afford to put it on their roof or
Exactly.
own, and it stays here, it doesn't get,
Mhm.
somewhere
Yeah.
else, I think people would go, yeah, let's do that.
I
Let's,
love that idea. I mean, and
yeah,
it is such a simple no-brainer of an idea. But an energy commons, especially living here where we do. And yeah, and 100%, it's that very what you were saying about journalists covering this, it's very misleading
mhm,
to speak about it in those terms, and rather like, just it's in out, putting the power literally back in the hands of
yeah.
us in our homes. Um,
Yeah,
and
and I recommend, I'm likely going to be interviewing Ashley, but Ashley Dawson, he's over at CUNY Staten Island professor. He wrote People's Power, and that
oh
is a
yeah.
great, great intro to what we're talking about, this idea. That's where I learned the term energy commons,
Mm,
and the possibilities. New York State is actually ahead of California in terms of like public utilities in this. It's kind of embarrassing what has been happening with
yeah.
the governor and the California utility, whatever the CP, I can't say the acronym, but what they've been doing to chip away rooftop solar, programs and things like that. So yeah, so that's kind of, it's not, people are going, well, you're an artist, I mean, it's a very, I kind of delve into both things, and hopefully I'm doing it in a creative way that I can educate people, and that's kind of the point of Mojave Project, is to be able to share information in a way that um, a lot of times scientists, they don't do a good, they can't communicate with the general public.
Yes, yeah, it's not
I'm trying to
accessible.
be
Yeah,
that
yeah.
interface, to look and do this, the research and look at the reports and things and distill it in a way that, people like
Mhm.
myself can understand,
Yeah. And I
and
don't, I always find it funny when people make that distinction between art and being an artist and doing the kind of work that you do, or any kind of like activism, environmentalism, conservation-based work. Because I mean, I feel that art, I mean,
yeah.
there's no border there for me.
No,
It,
and there's so many examples. I'm a big fan of Hans Hacke's work, and if you
oh yeah.
know anything about the famous piece that he did at the Museum of Modern Art, where he exposed all of these people that were actually on the board at the time that were
Mm,
slumlords, through this project, through a creative project, and so those are like, these kind of landmark pieces. The wheat field that I never say her last name right, Agnes Dene, she did
I
in
don't
the
know.
early
Yeah.
70s. The Harrisons, the work, those are touchstones, for the work that I do. And
Mm,
so I do think of this as art. I think of the
yeah,
conversations we
100%.
have on, an immersive tour in the Mojave Desert, those interactions, that's art, that's
Yeah.
public practice. So
Yeah.
for me, it's very creative activity, is very expansive.
Yeah. And really the thing is, the place in art, and I won't go we I know I won't draw us into a huge discussion about the place in art with all this, but just a quick one. Just the place, because art elicits an emotional, kind of visceral, somatic response. And that's really what, and when that's fused into environmental protection work, that becomes really powerful, because then it's not just this kind of compartmentalized experience of
Mhm.
now I'm being an activist and now I'm being an artist. It's like, you know, you're really able, it's like we feel what it is that's happening
Yeah.
when we're witnessing what's going on here in the desert in this
And that's
context.
the reason I'm still photographing and sometimes making short films. You know, I'm
Yeah,
still using those aesthetic ways to pull people in and trying to make, you know, engaging photographs that maybe get people to actually read that dispatch. You know,
yeah,
it's very conscious, you know, and like one of the best lobbyists for Yosemite National Park was Ansel Adams, you know, his
yeah,
photographs. He would go to Washington. I mean, he for a Sierra Club. And you know, I think that is one of the most the best things, the most wonderful things about his career was his activism. You know,
yeah,
of course, there's some, like all of us, there's a little dark stuff in there, you know. He photographed
yeah,
Manzanar, you know, and you know, he was hired by the US government to do that. But yeah, I mean, I think that really was powerful, you know, and
mhm,
I think it's especially with photographers, you know, we do have that tool, and it's nice when things can transcend from documentary and have that kind of purpose of educating awareness, but they can
mhm.
also be in the realm of fine art, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
because it's essentially speaking to the kind of the straight up activism, environmentalism work is speaking to kind of the left brain, and then the art that's fused into it is speaking to the right side of the brain. So then there's this kind of like really holistic experience of like a holistic documentation of what's going on. And I feel that your work really kind of embodies that. It's like
thank
the
you.
fusion of the two. So yeah, I feel like there's more I could talk to you about, but I know we've been talking for a while
It's probably a
now.
lot. I probably should
Yeah, for people
cover
watching
more.
right now, it's just like digest all this. And I'll be putting all of Kim's links in the box under the screen. And yeah, and please check out Mojave Project. Highly recommend just spending time with a dispatch. It's yeah, really, really worth it. Long form reading, your attention span. Well, thank you for it in this day and age. And yeah, thank you, Kim, for taking the time out to have a chat. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you around town.
Yeah, everyone's kind of holed up because it's hot right now,
I
but
know, it's yeah, summer's here, so
yeah.
all right, thanks, Kim.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.